excited to join you today. This is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm Noelle Lansford, and I am a designer, more specifically a product designer and a design systems expert. And most recently, I've actually started my own company. I am a single consultant in the product design and design systems space. But prior to that, I have experience working at startups as well as Fortune 500 company at global scale. So I've kind of seen the gamut of different company sizes and cultures. And so it feels like a good time to go out on my own and give companies what I think they really need. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about how I feel about certain things today.
I'm, that is brilliant. I think I've been wanting to have this conversation with you because your background and your knowledge resonates with myself in many, many ways. And I really have not come across people like yourself. And I've been wanting to have this show. I've been waiting to have this show and have this talk with you because I think like minds can really express a lot. So
Yes, I'm excited about it as well. We've gone back and forth a little bit, like over LinkedIn, and I feel like we
mhm.
both had to stop ourselves because we're like, we gotta save it for the podcast.
Yeah,
So I'm
exactly.
very excited too.
Oh, brilliant. Noel, I'm gonna jump straight into it. Um, One of the key things I see in our industry is that, and I am just a firm believer in this. I think other people have different concepts here. I think UX and UI are completely different. Um, and my feeling of that is that when people who do UX, they kind of come from a scientific background, or no, they do the scientific aspects of the design. And then when it comes down to the UI design aspect, I believe that what makes a good UI designer is somebody who has the ability to know code or the ability to know development. And that was one of the key things I wanted to bring up to you. Why do you think having that kind of development knowledge helps UI designers from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to dive into the latter part of that statement, but I do feel like I have to back up to talk through like UX UI being kind of
Hmm.
different.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I have the experience of working at like smaller startup companies as well as larger companies. And I just kind of wanted to talk through that real quick because
Go
I
for it.
feel like UX UI is often combined at smaller teams, especially when you're
Hmm.
working fast. And I think largely that can work pretty well. And like to me, I've like we've all kind of been hearing this term mostly everywhere of like product design. And so I would almost say that a product designer, from my perspective, is that more generalist that is the combination of UX, UI, and the development pipeline. And so I don't know, I kind of see that role as even maybe different. But yeah, you're absolutely right that UX is like very scientific. And I didn't really quite realize that until I was at a couple larger companies that really had specialists. Like I didn't know you could get PhD level education in the field of UX and like cognitive systems. But I've had the pleasure of working with some of those people. And so yeah, like they're hardly touching UI. They're really more behavioral with all of that. So you can definitely go down that track. Um, but yeah, I've tended to live more in that generalist space of being a product designer where I kind of keep everything in mind as I'm working. And so then that kind of goes into the latter part of what you were discussing with kind of knowing UI and knowing the development pipeline and how that's helped me out. So I would say as a product designer and as a design systems designer, having that general knowledge of all three disciplines, UX, UI, and development, has been really valuable for me since those are the kind of roles that I typically want to step into.
Do you think, do you think like people in this industry that, and I totally agree with you. When you're in a small company, you tend to be a generalist and you tend to take many hats. And that happens with very small companies. And generally, what I'm trying to ascertain is that when people do go into those kind of specified fields, does it help them in the long run to really, really put a lot of attention into the development aspect? Or do you think that it warrants that they just focus on the graphic design aspect and or on the design
Mhm.
system aspect without that development knowledge? What's your thoughts on
Right.
that?
Yeah, when you're or see, I even call it developing UI when you're like designing it, because that's just how I
Hmm.
think about it.
Yeah.
Any project that I've done or any role that I've done, if I can get away with it, no matter the size of the company, I always ask first, like, can we do a tour of your repository? And like sometimes that takes the development team a little bit aback because depending on what kind of designers they've worked with in the past, that might be the first time that they're having a designer ask them that question. Like, you show me your code setup because I
Yeah.
can read it and I can understand it. So I want to, that's kind of where I start. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that knowledge of like, if I'm going to build UI or even as a product designer, build a new feature, and I'm going to be integrated into the development pipeline in that way. Like if, you're working in sprints as a designer along your development team and you're attached to the pipeline in that way, I think it's really beneficial to first of all, like understand their scope, their current capabilities, and knowing how what you're doing affects that. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing for me is like scope bloat. A lot of
Yeah.
design can like
Yeah.
just blow up scope immediately without meaning to.
Hmm.
But yeah, like having that understanding of even like how the back end works at a more like rudimentary level, because I'm more knowledgeable about the front end than I am the back end. But as I've worked, I've gotten more familiar with how back end code runs and executes and is connected to the front end. And even having that knowledge of just like, this is what our data can do. Um, and knowing that is really important for how you would plug that into the front end, even if you're not the one writing the code that does it. Your design gives the opportunity to do that. And you're just like eliminating several checkpoints by having that knowledge and by communicating with your development team while you're developing features or components, depending on what you're doing there.
I mean, if you were me, well, let me take this statement back. If I was a developer and you came to me and said, "Hey, I want to look at your code," I would be very wary of you because
Yeah.
I know, and I've been a developer in my earlier years. I'd be very wary of you. Like, I'd be very wary of going into meetings with you because I know I can't pull the wool over your eyes.
Mm.
And I think you have a common understanding. You have a common understanding of the language, the way we work,
Hmm.
and you can point out where I am trying to cut corners, and this is why this is why I am very impressed when people of a design field have that development knowledge. Now, what's your take on that kind of communication and that way of collaborating with developers when you have that development knowledge? How has that helped you in your career?
Yeah, yeah. For me, it's a lot of times when I've been hired. Well, this is interesting. There's kind of two things with it. It has early in my career, it kind of hurt me, and later in my like now, it's very helpful for me. And so I'll start with why it's helpful, and then I'll go back to like earlier why it was maybe not the best.
Yeah.
Um, and so now it's great. And I've gotten hired or I get clients a lot of times because of that knowledge that I have. And I can say, like, yeah, I'm a designer who knows how to code. And I've successfully set up what I call like design to development pipelines. Because oftentimes when we're talking about pipelines, we're really just thinking about development. But like for me, I think about design as being integrated into that development process. And a lot of designers don't necessarily love this perspective that I have of, we make stickers of the real piece of software. Like we can dilly-dally in Figma,
Yeah.
but there's a certain point where it's not real in there. It's not real in the design tool. It's real as the application, as the software, as the website, whatever it is. And so getting it there, communicating successfully to development is much more important to me than all of my files being absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
So now there's like things to be said about like designer communication for those that don't have that code knowledge, which is also kind of a different conversation. But yeah, that piece is like really highly valuable. And the teams that I talk to about it that really want my expertise in that area are ones that have had a lot of trouble in that area with what they're calling a handoff, right? And I don't even think about it as a handoff. I think about it as we're like this the entire process. Now, I'm not trying to bloat the development team's work by involving them more in design, but most of the people that I talk to that are in development are like, yes, please get me in the room early because I'll tell you immediately if that's possible or not. And so that even has its own things. Like there's a time to ideate as a designer in your own little world. But as soon as you start thinking about actually implementing, that's when I think that we should be bringing in developers in the conversation, not, hey, I made this thing, here you go make it. That's not really going to help anybody.
No. But that's how we are at the moment in the industry. It's like, I've done something here, now go and take it and
right. Yeah, and maybe some developers feel like it's bothering them, but I've really never run into that myself. Like they would much rather talk to you up front and you learn a lot more. Like even if you've done a repository tour, is what I call it. Let's take a tour of your repository. I do that first before I develop a feature. And most people are like, yes, please do that. So you know what we have. And like most people are really honest, like, here's where we did cut corners in our repository. And that's not surprising to me because we all have to do that to ship real world solutions. You're never going to have a perfect piece of software. And so knowing where those problem areas are allows us to either say, hey, when I develop this feature, do we actually want to go in and improve this feature and put that in as a part of the scope? Or do we want to kind of keep the solution that we have right now and work around it? And those are the kinds of things that when you're designing, that's what I see like kind of blow up scope a lot is when you have no idea where the corners were cut and you're like, in your mind, you're like, oh, this is like changing two colors. This shouldn't be that bad. And your development team is like about to pass out because they're like, oh my gosh, changing those two colors is going to break everything. You know what I mean? That's like a silly example, but things like that, just to know how those structures are set up really helps with that. So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of the pipeline that I like, bringing people into my design files before just handing them off. Like, I also don't love the idea of just like, here, developer, use this design tool to get everything you need out of it and don't talk to me kind of thing. Like, I'm not like that at all either. Like, if you give me a tour of your code, I'm going to be giving you a tour of my designs. A lot of designers also don't like annotating their work, because they're like, it's all there in Figma. You should just be able to use it. And I'm like, that's true. And you might not have to annotate it if your developers are pretty savvy in Figma or whatever design tool you're using. But to me, it's like, yeah, but if a developer handed you the code base with, like maybe 0 comments and you're not familiar with code, that's a little bit how they're going to feel in a design tool where it's not really their job to know it, And so annotating some of those things, right? Like one of the things that I run into a lot, and this is a really specific example, but in design systems, you make lots of buttons. So, as you do, you make a lot of buttons. And like there's some really specific spacing sometimes with icons maybe to like make things look offset a little bit. And a developer likely isn't going to notice that there's like 2 pixel spacing on one side and 4 pixel spacing on the other. And that would be intentional only when the icon is turned on. So things like that, I've seen like designers kind of leave in Figma for the front end team to just like find. And then it's like, wait, it doesn't look right when it's made. It's like, those are the very specific kind of spacing, like conditional spacing details that you're absolutely going to need to communicate to your development team and not just like expect them to find.
Yeah. I mean, I can dissect so much of what you just said. And there's so much I want to ask you. And I think one of the key things you just said at the end about developers having to find that fine detail. I think we've lost our way since dev tools in Figma came about, and we've lost the way of documentation in general. Running specs on your designs and stuff like that. And we kind of got lazy because of having those kind of features in our design tool sets, and we're really pointing the fingers at our development teams when these things are wrong, but you can't blame them when you don't have correct documentation. And I think that's come about with many things.
Mm-hmm.
I want to backtrack to something you said, and it's something that resonates with me. You mentioned your road to knowing development was not great, and I have an experience as well, but I want you to share your kind of experience with this.
I love this. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Let's have some sad development
Let's
stories.
Go. Let's get
Development
our audience
therapy session.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's like a one-to-one. We can digress and
Yeah, and something so interesting is there's lots of people like you and I in the design system space. And that's part of the reason why I love the design system space, is because you get those weird hybrid people that have all these crazy stories about trying to do both at the same time. And some people are still equally doing both at the same time. That's definitely not the path that I've taken. But we all have really similar stories of just being really disruptive somehow by just knowing both things. And so that's kind of how my journey started. Was I was a part of a college program. My major was actually split between design and development, and it was specifically front end code. And there wasn't a lot of programs like that when I was in school, but it was one of the first programs that I could find that had that, and it was actually sitting in the design program too. A lot of the ones that I saw were sitting more on the computer science side. And so I was really excited about it, went in, learned it, and then took a C# class because I wanted to, have I don't know why. I mean, it was really beneficial, but everybody thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
You're going to take that for fun? And I was like, yeah, it'll be fun. And I was like, it's not fun. But, but it was great to know. It's great to learn just fundamentals of what you can and can't do at in code. And so I started out really with a lot of gusto. I am going to equally split myself between design and development. And my first couple jobs were actually getting hired as a developer, because shocker, there's more development jobs than there are design jobs, and the design jobs are highly competitive compared to the developer jobs. That's just real. And I would say that's still the case. It's not that getting hired as a dev is super easy, but you need the ratio of designers to developers is going to favor hiring developers. And so, I started as a front-end developer, and every time I would get put on a team, I was like, yeah, but I also design. And then they'd be two totally different departments. And so it really created this problem of who do you report to? And so I ran into that a lot early career. And also because I wasn't really, when you graduate, you're not just magically proficient at your job.
Yeah.
So if you're in college, you're not proficient at your job yet. It's going to be okay though. It's okay. Nobody's expecting you to be. But having this claim really early on that I was proficient at both and that I could do both was really exhausting, because I wasn't proficient at either, really. I mean, at the time, I would say I was more proficient at development than I was design. And my professors would probably agree, because I had some crazy designs in design school. I mean, we all you did design school. We know. But me especially, if there's any hope for anybody struggling in design, it would be me, and my student portfolio was so tragic.
I don't even look back. I don't look back at any of that work. It gives you a proper cringe factor.
I know. It's very, I think it's good to look at every once in a while, just to if you're ever feeling too good about yourself,
just bring you back down to
and development too. I had a lot to overcome with development. When I first started that program, I am not kidding, I didn't know that you could make folders on your computer. I did not know how computers worked at all. And so, going from that to, and this isn't to brag, but it's to give hope to anybody that's in school struggling with their program. I went from not knowing how to make a folder on my computer to launching global design systems for Fortune 500 company household names. And And it's like, you can do that. It's really
Yeah.
hard, but you can do that. But yeah, it wasn't smooth. It wasn't smooth at all. And really the problem that I was running into early career was I wasn't proficient at both. And so advertising myself as being proficient at both and being bad at both was really hurting me. Whereas if I
Mhm.
would have just picked one and gotten really proficient at it, then that probably would have been easier. As far as early career goes. And so sometimes I have a hard time like suggesting that people in school learn both. Like some people are really cut out for it. I was not one of
Mhm.
those people, I don't think, because I was really struggling with both. But I really loved design, but I was just picky when it came to development. That was my
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
problem, right? Is like I'm picky, but I don't know what I'm doing. So how is that gonna help any company?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would say that that was really tricky. And, front end development of being a kind of a subsect of development is really hard too,
Mhm.
because sometimes it's not seen as real development. So you get a lot of people kind of saying,
Mm.
like, you're not doing real code. And I hear that all the time, right? Where it's like, not only are you fighting just to like be a designer developer, but now you have to like say that your type of development is actually development and all this
Oh,
other stuff. So
these these developers, they're brutal. They're brutal.
yeah, but so are designers. Like I have some like good
Oh
designer
wow.
stories too.
We
So
can we can bring that for another podcast,
I
definitely.
know
I would love to bring you back for that one
a
because
therapy session for
yeah,
hybrids.
definitely.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
That's what it was. I found that these developers were just so brutal when I was starting off. And I
Hmm.
think, you know, right now I see the relationship between UX and product managers being bad. And actually between developers actually got amazingly better.
Hmm.
And when I started out, it was the fact that, in my university days, there was only a tiny module on web development or
Hmm.
anything on that front. And then I started to do portfolios, or how should you say, help many people with their websites. But when I came into the field, it was the developers that were so brutal to me that made
Hmm.
me like, hey, why are you even acting like this? Like,
Yeah.
they were literally like pinning me to the point where most of those designs were not even going in, and they were
Yeah.
just like lying to me. Like by the end of it, like what I initially designed and what actually came into production was really, really
Mm.
not one to one. And obviously the fingers get pointed, and then obviously, you kind of get blamed, and then you lose your job, and you move on to the next one, and then
Right.
it it,
Yeah. No,
it was the case.
that's true.
It
That's
was
true.
literally
That's
it.
yeah, that's sad, but that is how what happens a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah, and it got to the point because I was contracted, and I was in the years where contracting in UK was really good. So I was able to move from one contract to another, and I remember it came to a point where this developer just said, "Hey, dude, you might as well not come in next day because you don't know nothing on this
Hmm.
development front." And it was the shocker that hit me and said, "You know what? I'm gonna have to learn this language and learn this way of my design and development in order for me to progress in my career." And it was a wake up call. It was the wake up call that um, really got me to start saying, hey, you don't know everything. Put the effort in, speak the language. And once you're able to speak the language, you will see a change. And
Hmm.
it was the case
Hmm.
that once you're able to speak the language, you're really able to bring them back down to earth. Um, and I think this is something I am seeing a lot in the or in the design field, especially in teams that work in squads or
Hmm.
certain things. You normally have a dedicated UX designer in that
Yeah.
development team, and what I see is that that designer is literally bullied in their designs to make development teams happy. It's like,
Mm.
hey, we can't do this, we can't do this. Change your
Yeah.
designs and go back. And I
That's
think,
so interesting. That story of like having that very moment, like pivotal call to like learn it or get out. That's really intense.
Yeah, it was because I thought to myself, how am I like designing,
Hmm.
I hold my hands up. I haven't done design in a long time, and there are way more better designers out there in the field than I am. I'm a DesignOps expert now, but I really enjoyed it, and I think what really hit me was when I had that development teams on my back, or
Hmm.
bringing me down. It really made me want to think, did I choose the right career? Do you know?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I feel that. And, I think that's ultimately why I chose design. And it's like kind of a sad reason. I usually spin it into a positive of like, I do personally like design better than I like development. But also I feel like
Hmm.
I was kind of pushed out of it. Where it was like,
Yeah,
I was, if you're struggling in development, the deadlines are really, really, they're real in development. And
yeah,
so that way I have a lot of empathy for developers that are trying to meet those deadlines. But at the same time, it's like, I just know there's people faster at developing than me. And at the end of the
yeah,
day, it was like, I can know what this means. I can know how this works. But from a business perspective, why would they pay me to be slower
yeah,
doing both
exactly.
things? You know?
No, absolutely. I think, it warrants that, there are people better skilled in the job set. As you mentioned, you try to
Hmm.
do both things. And if you harness your skills in one, you try and go as deep as you can. But then at the same time, your passion, like as you mentioned,
Hmm.
design, and also for myself, I didn't want to lose that. So I didn't want to go too far deep. And at the same time, I wanted to always come back to design and come back to UX. So my advice, that if anyone's listening to this podcast and you want to do this and you want to follow in Noelle's and myself's kind of path, learn it, but don't lose sight of your passion. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, that's great advice. I love that.
We're gonna
I love that.
we'll
And
bookmark
and
that.
I'll put the more like sassy version is don't lose your passion. That's great advice. But also ask
Mhm.
yourself, what would a business actually pay me to do? Because if you go
Yes.
too far down a path of learning both, really ask yourself, like, what role am I going for that a company would pay me to do this skill set? Because, I mean, you can learn things for fun and that's great. But if you're learning things because you think that it's going to further your career, do make sure it's actually furthering your career.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very absolutely spot on. I think those are very good points that will help anyone who's really delving into it. And that's why I really want to touch on another subject, because I think by UI designers knowing code, it really does help them in not going crazy with their designs and understanding the design constraints. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I have two thoughts. My first
Yeah,
thoughts
go for
are
it.
I make boring designs. I love making boring designs because a lot of times you don't need exciting designs. But at the same time, sometimes when I see people make exciting designs, I'm like, that's cool. I would have never thought of doing it that way because I would have been thinking about the chain of events that would have had to have happened on the development side, and I would have never pushed that boundary. So I think like when it comes to a redesign, I'm kind of all for like, let's blow things up and like let's actually do a redesign. We redo everything. If that's what the company's investing in, let's actually do that proper and not constrain ourselves needlessly. But more often than not, you're not doing a redesign. And so that's when all of those other factors of tech debt, current capabilities, properly planning scope with your product team and your development team as a designer really comes into play. And I kind of feel like the designer should be able to take ownership of that aspect in their own realm while it being collaborative between those three disciplines. Um, Curious on your
Yeah.
thoughts about that.
I mean, when it comes down to, I mean, let's take one thing, and then this is a funny thing. I asked a lot of designers, and I'm not going to name in the companies I worked in. Yeah, I asked them, what do you understand what the word tech debt means?
Mm,
And they said, oh, it's the how much it's going to cost, or how much capacity is needed to do our designs. And I was like, okay.
hmm,
So, simple things like that,
mm-hmm.
a simple word like tech debt, which all
Yeah.
development team know, it's the key thing in understanding the design to development a relationship. I think what happens with designers in general, and I might be going a bit off topic in this sense, but I think what designers in general tend to do is that they don't speak to developers when they come up with these creative ideas,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like, I started with a blank screen, and here's now the cake with the icing, with the with the candles and the sparklers, and it's like, did you do any like discovery with your dev team in order to get your
Right.
designs? And that's what's missing, in my opinion. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And, I feel like it's easy to blame one side or the other. And not that you were doing that, but like, I kind of think about that of like, you and I have both had bad experiences as designers with developers. So there's sometimes that I can totally understand where the designer's like, I just want to do my thing. I want to get stakeholder approval, and the dev team's just going to have to do it, because they're bitter about something that's happened to them. And same thing on the development side, where they're like, I'm not going to talk to the designer. Every time I talk to the designer, my scope blows up and they come up with something crazy. So I'm just going to implement it the way that I think it should be done and not talk to them about it. And it's less of bridging the divide and more of like healing the divide. That's how I see my role, is like, how do we get these two disciplines to stop doing that and actually be okay with a collaborative, integrated process where we're just making software. We're not making designs. We're not making development things. We are making software together. How do we get there?
I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, what are the key things that you're trying to do in order to rectify that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the team. Like for dev-heavy teams, I have a harder time with dev-heavy teams. Like I won't lie about that. Where it's like, especially if you have a lot of back-end developers that don't see the value in design. I've met a lot of back-end developers that love design and understand the value of design. But if you're working with people that really don't want to invest in the UI, I just don't see a designer having very successful conversations in a company like that.
Yeah.
Because they're always going to be having that uphill battle. Whereas if you're in a company that really does invest in the user experience, then you have a business case to work with, and your development team should care because it's what your business is investing in. So you're going to be on the product roadmap. You're not fighting to get there all the time. So your value isn't, you don't have to prove that. You're part of the conversation. You're at the table. In those situations, it's much easier, I think, to heal that divide, because most of the time it just comes down to there being a person in the room willing to listen to both and able to understand both, and then saying, what this team means is this in your world, and what this team means is this in your world. And once they kind of get that, most of the time, they're like really excited to work together.
Okay. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to bring you on, was a lot of people in this industry are just struggling just to get designs over, just to get people to listen and say, okay, we're going to take your designs. And so that's one battle that we're all trying to fight. And then there's that battle of the development, so we're fighting many, many battles to get in. And I think this is the key thing I wanted to get from you, was what advice would you give to designers who are coming into this field to really enhance that relationship with development from your perspective?
So just to make sure that I heard that, like, what would you do coming into a team to really make that relationship with development?
Well, I think the question is more on people who are coming into this industry, into this design and development industry.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them to really excel in their job and to really bridge that relationship with development? What advice would you give to new starters like that?
Yeah, I would say be proficient at design first, before going straight into development. Like that's kind of my initial advice, is like be proficient at the job that you're actually hired to do. The cherry on top is that, and like they become inseparable the more that you do it. But, if you're just entering the field, don't let development trample you, but also learn from them. And I would say being willing to learn from development goes a long way, and not telling them exactly how to do their job goes a long way, and also not letting them tell you how to do your job goes a long way, where like this is just like simple career advice, but having self-respect about your own discipline and your own work that you do really does. You're not going to be mean doing that. You're going to earn respect from your team by doing that. So I would say that establish self-respect, establish your design skills, and be open to learning from development. And that will go a long, long way. Just being willing to, like, one of the things that I would suggest is get to know your development team, even if you're not talking about code. Like, the first thing you should do when you walk into the job is set up a one-on-one with your development team. Like, for each person, just get to know them, get to know who they are a little bit. And that goes a long way, because then they're not this, like, development monolith, really smart people that you're afraid of. They become people that you can just kind of talk to candidly.
Nice advice there. I want to ask you something, and this might touch a bit of nerves on your side. I'm very interested to hear this answer. Do you think UX? Okay. Let me rephrase this question. Do you think designers should be embedded in in development teams, or do you think they're better placed to be embedded in the business side of the company?
Wow, I love this question. I love this question. Embedded in the business or embedded in development. So I will say more than times than not now, I see design embedded in development. And that by proxy kind of gets you to the business because you're lumped in with them, right?
Yep.
My answer is kind of both. And I think that's because I'm coming from that product side where it's like, I'll give two answers. If I'm working at a startup, I would say both all the way, because I think the designer needs to be talking about the product roadmap with the product team, as well as being embedded in the development team as they're shipping and creating features. So I would say for small teams, both. When it comes to, like, global Fortune 500 companies, I think design needs to have a heavy seat at the table, but I don't think that it's necessarily an individual designer's role to communicate vision to the business. And I could be wrong about that. But I think as long as design, there is an executive that either is a designer and represents design discipline, or has heavy investment interest in design as a discipline. And I'm actually going to reword that. Not design as a discipline, but design as a business value. Your design needs to have business value. If it doesn't, you're not, what are you doing? Like,
yes,
and as somebody that's experienced layoffs, if your designs are not providing value, you will be laid off. Like, that is, your team will be gone, especially in the current market that we're in. So, I would say, yes, business needs to be invested. Whether or not it's an individual designer communicating that, not sure. But I would say when it comes to UI design and actually making the elements themselves, making the workflows themselves, I really think that the designer-developer relationship needs to be pretty seamless. And so that's why I kind of would say to sit in development with heavy investment and business value while doing so.
So it's like the hybrid model, isn't it? It's like, or I've heard it before. It's called the Spotify model, or what have you. Have them embedded in those teams and let them operate with those teams. And and just from experience, and I did try this out with one company. What I found was that when I did try this out, the designers felt isolated because there wasn't that well, we did have a centralized team, but it was more like a guild. It was more, we operated more as a guild rather than as a team, because that person is embedded in that development team. So they have their own manager, and they have their own goals and stuff that are accumulated to that team. And I think why I kind of asked you that question, or why I'm kind of bringing this point up, is because I think designers in general from the product roadmap are very, very better positioned in the business. And I think when you have that designer embedded in those development teams, you lose the control of your designs.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
No,
That's
I
where
think that's a really great point. And you bring up a good question about like pods. I've heard people call them pods, squads,
pods. Pods.
Any fun name that a company makes up to feel kind of quirky about their teams, whatever that word. That's my cynical take on the cool team name. But that's where like in my opinion that executive becomes really important, right? Like if you have a bunch of designers that are at varying seniorities being placed on pods or development teams, you absolutely need to have that culture of coming back and having a key design stakeholder that is keeping track or understanding what is happening on all those pods and facilitating conversations. Because, right, when everything's on pods, and I've seen this happen too, is you might start designing and developing duplicate work. And that's just in general, whether it's design or development, you just start making the same thing because you're not talking to the other pods, you're just getting your tickets and going. But that's why that inner communication is so important. And so whether that's happening through the business or through a design executive, I think you're right, it could be done in either way. And depending on the organization, one might be smoother than the other. As long as there's that central spot where you do have that investment and control from the business side, I think that's the key point there, is staying communicated, understanding yourself, because like some pieces of software are just massive, just absolutely massive.
Yeah, it's a jungle. It's enough.
Yeah, that you like you would think that you would know what, every little thing does, but it's sometimes impossible to know. And sometimes you have teams that like, you might have had somebody that's worked there for forever and they still don't know what everything does.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're working in an environment like that, yeah, you absolutely need to be in tight cahoots with your teams. But yeah. I like your take. I like your take of design in the business. That's been on my mind a lot more recently, is like how should design be in business, and I especially with layoffs being so rampant.
Yeah.
I think that brings up a really great question, and why this question of like, should designers learn to code, I think is even coming back up as a topic, because we all have heard this before, right? This is a hot topic that cycles every couple years. And I feel like it's really kind of an identity crisis, because all these designers thought they were doing this meaningful work only to be laid off with their entire team, and the development team was still affected, but maybe not as heavily as design. And so that kind of leads you to be like, where can I make a difference? Where can I have control? Because you have a complete lack of control in that situation. Yeah. And I would say business is kind of the easiest way to garner that, because they're the ones controlling the money, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense to go there. But I think, again, I've experienced that before. You do have to ask yourself the hard question: was my design actually delivering business value? If I go to business with this case, does it actually hold weight? Getting familiar with how to come up with numbers is really hard. If you're, because 1 minute you're on LinkedIn and you're like, you need to learn how to code. And then the next minute you need to learn how to make a business pitch. And you're like, I thought I was a designer. What is this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something I am definitely I've got somebody coming up who's really kind of gonna illustrate that or bring that to the fold, where people who are going through these boot camps and journey learning design are not being told, like, you've got to wear multiple hats before you even touch a design. And you need to be an expert in, business negotiation, or just understanding the business, or being able to sell, and being able to storytell. And there's many multiple hats before you even really touch the designs. And I think this is where I think we're failing a lot in people coming in the industry, because they're not being shown the full picture.
Yeah, absolutely. They're getting bombarded with like a million different tools, and then come to find out that's not what they should be spending their time on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
That's
that other
actually,
stuff.
yeah, it's actually like that. Really and truly, if you're going to learn a tool, it's probably 5% of the actual thing if you want to be in this career. So,
Yeah.
no, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and speaking about this. And I would love to bring you back because I really want to touch base on you about if a business really does invest in the return of investment of design. And I think that is the biggest change in culture, in my
Yeah.
opinion, and I really
Yeah.
want
I would
to bring
love
you
to
back
talk
on.
about that.
No,
That's something
definitely,
that's hot on my mind because, starting a business
Mhm.
based on the skill set of design and consulting in that space, that's something that I'm getting a lot more familiar with firsthand, where it's like, yeah, client, why why do you need this? Or,
Yeah.
so far I've been really lucky in that people come to me of like, hey, I actually really need this. And so there's not as much like selling that you have to do when
Yeah.
somebody already knows that they need that or wants to invest in it. But yeah, it's like it kind of begs the question, if they're not willing to invest in that, do you actually proceed and try to push the envelope with them? Or when do you
hmm
actually back off and say, okay, why don't you do it your way? And then you either learn that they were right or you learn that there's an opportunity in the future.
No, absolutely. I think um, a lot of people are probably going to go back into the freelance sector. I think it warrants us to have this conversation and really, really expand on it. So I'm definitely want to bring you back on the show again, and we can
Amazing. Well,
really,
thank you for this conversation. This has been a lot of fun. I love
yeah,
the design, anywhere from design to development therapy to career
yeah.
advice to how to work in a business. This has been a lot of fun.
No, it has. I felt like it was a therapy session. I felt like a lot has come off my chest, and we were able to really hit a touch point. And so, yeah, I'm gonna go back and have a think about my life in a bit. So,
I love it.
no, I really appreciate it, Noelle. And yeah, and definitely we will. I wanted to kind of get the audience to know about your consultancy. So, do you want to speak about your consultancy for a bit?
Absolutely. So right now, like if you want to talk to me, just, find me on LinkedIn or go to my website. There's a little contact there. My website is my first name and my last name.com. So it's noellelansford.com. Maybe I will make another website in the future. So I will be sure to post about that if I do that. But yeah, I'm in the really early stages. I love working with startups that really need to either create new features for their products or start scaling their UI and want to invest in modern UI or design systems. And so that's really been my passion area. Of course, I have experience more in the enterprise space as well and would absolutely love to work with teams like that as well. So yeah, if you're listening to this and you need some consulting on scaling your UI, healing your designer to developer relationships, or talking about how to get design at the business table, I would absolutely love to chat, even if it's not for hiring or contract reasons. I just love meeting people like that. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn at Noelle Lansford.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to it. Again, to the audience, we will definitely bring Noelle back onto the podcast to really delve into this topic. So thank you so much, Noelle, for coming today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been a blast. Looking forward to future conversations. And I love this podcast. So everybody keep listening. He's going to have on some amazing guests in the future. So keep an ear out. I'm not afraid to plug your podcast on your podcast.
Oh, brilliant.
DesignOps aligned.
That's some free advertising there. I
That's
love
right.
it. I
free
really love
ad.
it.